This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
My annual top 5 predictions for the upcoming Michigan football season are next right here on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
They said you can't beat Ohio State. Now what?
Brady gets terrific. Throws it. Get it. Touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Let's get right to it. Without further ado, my top 5 predictions for the 2024 Michigan football season. Let's rank in descending order. Number 5, I think 7th year, that's right, 7th year senior Jack Tuttle and Alex Orji will share the starting quarterback duties to open the season before Orji eventually takes over the job himself the second half of the season. I think that if Michigan were playing the kind of schedule that we have the last couple of years where you've got several weeks to essentially warm up and develop guys and build depth, I think that we'd just start with Alex Orji from the top and just let him learn on the job against, opponents we don't have a huge risk of losing outright to. But we don't. We're opening up against the Texas Longhorns, consensus preseason top 5 team, and that's week 2 of the year. And by the way, week 1's not a gimme. I mean, we're going to be heavily favored over Fresno State, but that is perennially one of the best group of 5 programs out there, maybe a top 2 program with Boise State in the Mountain West Conference. So, you can't have your quarterback go out there and throw 4 picks and, fumble all over himself in that one either. And so I think because of that, there needs to be a stabilizing element. I think Jack Tuttle will be used as that stabilizing element. Then eventually, I think Alex Orji will get it. The ground underneath him will, I think, solidify enough that his superior upside and playmaking ability will take hold in the second half of the year. But with that Texas game early, I think we're going to wait a bit to see that happen. I think there are reasons why Michigan made so many comparisons between Orji and Jalen Milroe leading up to the Rose Bowl last year. And how much Orji did a great job impersonating Jalen Milroe. Very similar character arc for Jalen Milroe a year ago to Alex Orji. They're very, very similar players. Number 4, I think Michigan will finish with a top 5 defense in the country again. And by top 5, in this case, I mean the advanced stats, defensive efficiency adjusted for opponent strength of opponent stats. I don't mean the counting stats. Those are largely irrelevant nowadays. Especially with unbalanced schedules in college football. But when you look at, I don't recall Michigan ever having 2 defensive tackles as dominant at the same time as Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that the best defenses and vintage defenses in SEC lore typically get, not up here in the Big Ten. I think it's quite possible Michigan will have the first defensive tackle picked in Mason Graham or Kenneth Grant, the first linebacker picked in the draft in Jayshon Barham, the first corner picked in the draft in Will Johnson. I think they're absolutely loaded in terms of top-line talent on defense. It's not as deep as it was a year ago, but I'm not sure we'll ever see another Michigan team again as deep as we were a year ago with both COVID extra eligibility and the way we developed. That was a unique circumstance. We are loaded on that side of the ball. Number 3, I think Donovan Edwards is going to be the Big Ten's top Heisman vote getter. I think he's going to have a monster year. And unlike a Travion Henderson, there's no Quinshon Judkins to share carries with. There's no Blake Corum to make a way for. Now, this is Michigan. We're going to run the ball a lot. We're going to have a deep stable of backs. You're going to see Khalil Mullings, and you're going to see Benjamin Hall. And you're going to see Jordan Marshall, Mr. Ohio football, coming in. You're going to see, hopefully, Cole Cabana, the Michigan native speedster who was injured much of last year. But I think Edwards will be the bell cow. Now, his definition of bell cow will be a little bit different. This is going to be more of a Jahmyr Gibbs bell cow than a Blake Corum bell cow, where we're talking, 25, 28 touched a game like Corum. Maybe 18 of them are carries and the rest are catches. So he's going to be very multifaceted, and he's going to get a lot of big stages. But I think he is prepared to have a monster year, and I think they will build the offense around him. Number 2, I think Michigan's going to beat Ohio State for the 4th year in a row by dashing the Buckeyes' hopes for an undefeated season in Columbus on November the 30th. However, I think the Buckeyes will exact revenge the very next week by beating Michigan in Indianapolis in the Big Ten championship game. So Ryan Day is going to go from fired on Monday to maybe an extension the next Monday. If this scenario plays itself out. That I think Michigan will do similar to what we saw after the Natty in 97 when the Wolverines started 0-2, then went 8 in a row. Similar to the first years under Bo and Mo and Lloyd and Jimmy, where you lost a game or two early and then finished strong in those rookie years. I think Sharon Moore will do that this time as well. I think they'll be, especially early on, I'm really concerned about that road game at Washington, who I know has lost a ton, but that's going to be a night game in Seattle. That's still nothing to just breeze through. The game against Texas we talked about, I'm worried about the timing of that. I could see, and you have USC in there too. They're still USC. I could see a couple of losses there early with this brand new offense and coaching staff getting the feet underneath them set and then finishing very strong. That's happened before for Michigan teams coming off natties or Michigan teams with new head coaches. Number 1. After becoming the first Big Ten team to make the college football playoff in 3 consecutive years, Michigan will become the first to do it 4 years in a row. I do think Michigan will make the college football playoff again, but will not repeat as national champions. And I don't know how many undefeated teams we'll ever see again, and I don't know how many repeat national title teams we'll ever see again with this expanded playoff and the toll that it takes and the transfer portal and everything else. We could be heading into, by college football standards, I mean, we're still going to have dominant programs, historical greats, and forms of dynasties, but our definition of dynasty might be a little bit different. It might look a lot like a college basketball, where as great as Duke was under Mike Krzyzewski, they won back-to-back national championships one time. They made a ton of Final Fours, okay, but it's hard to win that national championship in a single elimination event every single year. So that'll do it for what I think are the top 5 predictions for the year. Let's come back after this break. Let's find out what Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, thinks about these. We'll have his questions, comments, and insults next. Folks, if you want to support what we do here at Michigan Podcast and make maybe a nice little dividend for yourself on the side, join us at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. If you're one of our subscribers, I just posted my 2024 college football win total best bets for the year, exclusive for our followers there and supporters there. Now, $10 a month, you're going to get more than your money back based on the track record of my win totals. All time, my win total best bets on the site there are 37, 17, and 1. That's 68%. All right, so if there's a better $10 a month you're going to find anywhere else in terms of return on investment, I don't know what it is, and I'd urge you to give them your $10 instead. All right. So thanks to all of you for supporting us year round at Michigan Podcast here. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. We've got exclusive handicapping picks all year long. Not just football. As you just saw, we're doing Major League Baseball too. We'll do college and pro football, college basketball. We've got stuff for you all year long if you support us at Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. And thanks to all of you who have, because you make Michigan Podcast possible at Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Well, let's get an alternative viewpoint from our good friend and one of the world's few remaining sane bucknuts. Although, if you've been following Mark on X over the last few years, the sanity with every Michigan win is slowly but surely creeping away. We will try to bring him back into the light. Welcome back to the show here, Mark Rogers. You can check out his channel, The Voice of College Football. A lot of great information, particularly this time of year, if you want to take a look at win total markets. Wink. Mark, good to see you, brother. How are you?
Well, Steve, it's my role just to remind people of recent history and all-time history and to just inform. That's all I do. I just inform and enlighten.
Yep, that's clearly what you've been doing. Informing and enlightening for sure. All right. So I have laid out my perennial top 5 predictions for the upcoming Michigan football season. Take it away. You get a chance to, questions, comments, insults, all up to you, my friend.
All of the above. Here we go. So you've got at number 5. I would like to know, with your scenario of there being a quarterback competition and then Alex Orji eventually winning, why is Davis Warren no longer an option? So I understand from certain people that I trust and respect that Davis Warren is a better athlete than many people would know. Also, in the spring game, he appeared to be at least as capable, if not a better passer than Jack Tuttle. And here's my deal with Jack Tuttle. Jack Tuttle had, though brief, trials with Indiana. They were repeated. They were over and over and over. And I know it's Indiana, and I know he's going to have such a better supporting cast at Michigan. However, there are guys walking around like Brendan Sorsby and Peyton Ramsey that put up much better numbers than Jack Tuttle with pretty impressive TD to pick ratios. And Jack Tuttle was pretty much a 1-to-1 guy, touchdowns to interceptions at Indiana. So I'm not necessarily seeing where Jack Tuttle is proven to be worthy of his previous 4-star status. And of course, there's also the complication of a team coming to Ann Arbor by the name of Texas. So you can't hold that cake schedule audition between J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara. So I'm just wondering why Davis Warren is not one of your options.
Well, Davis Warren's played well in the spring before, did it a couple of years ago. And then in game action, it just was not there. Now, he was, I agree, he was the best quarterback in the spring. Jack Tuttle did not play in the spring. But Tuttle was the backup quarterback to J.J. McCarthy and played quite a bit last year. I want to make sure I make this very clear. I'm not saying this is actually an optimum situation or even a good one. I'm just making a prediction of what I think the situation will be. And I think that if we were starting with the schedule we had last year, I think Alex Orji would be the starter from the very beginning. I think it is because of that game against Texas, the caliber of defense that you are returning. Texas is returning a lot on offense, too. They lost like their top 5 pass catchers. Their number 1 tailback, who got hurt at the end of last year, is off to the NFL draft. So Texas is replacing quite a bit, too. People seemingly kind of forget that. We lost 13 guys the NFL draft. They lost 10, So I think that game is looking like similar to the Alabama-Texas game a couple of years ago in Austin. I think that's a game that Michigan thinks to win it. It's got to be like 21-17, 24-21. And it's going to be really about not giving Texas short fields, make Quinn Ewers throw deep balls, which have not been his strength as a college quarterback thus far. That's why he's back in college again and not in the NFL. And I think that kind of a game, you're looking for a game manager quarterback, a guy who is self-aware, understands what he can do. And now, this is all pre-camp. And guys do get, they're allowed to be coached and allowed to get better, okay? And so it could very well be that Alex Orji makes a huge step this summer, but there's a reason why Michigan compared him to Jalen Milroe on their scout team last year. There's a reason why Michigan kept saying, and it wasn't just spin, that they're going to get a really good look at Jalen Milroe because of Alex Orji. They're almost identical, man. I mean, you look at their playing styles, you look at their athletic traits, you look at their throwing motions. I mean, Milroe is a higher graded recruit, but the arc of his lack of, throwing acumen heading into being a starter, it's all very similar. And what did Jalen Milroe do at the beginning of last year, Mark? Lost at home to Texas. Okay. And so I could foresee a very similar story arc for Alex Orji, Freudian slip, for Alex Orji this fall.
Okay. So I agree with you that if I had to make a prediction and there was money on the line or something significant on the line, I'm going Alex Orji, and I don't even have to think twice about it, that he will eventually be the starting quarterback at Michigan. However, I'm just stating that Davis Warren, I know little about him other than what I've read, what I've seen in spring play, and most recently, of course, this past March, versus Jack Tuttle barely proving to be just a marginal quarterback when there have been other quarterbacks at Indiana that have performed decidedly better. So we're going with unproven, unknown commodity Davis Warren versus proven marginal quarterback in Jack Tuttle. And that's why I just serve up Davis Warren as an option.
Yeah. I mean, this is the year we're paying for Jimmy's inability to go 2 years in a row without signing a clear heir apparent to J.J. McCarthy. Some of that was the lack of NFL development at the position before J.J., and then some of it was the fact that Jimmy basically flirted with the NFL 3 recruiting cycles in a row. Now, if you look at the future, okay, I mean, essentially Jaden Davis this year, Carter Smith next year, and Brady Hart now the year after that. They essentially have a top 150 quarterback 3 recruiting classes in a row for the future, but this is the year they don't have one of those, and so you're going to play to your defense quite a bit, and hope that by the end of the year, Orji is self-aware enough that he'll play within himself and then prove to be a weapon with his legs.
Steve, your next point involved the Michigan defense ranking in the top 5 in the country, and I firmly believe that the Big Ten had 4 of the top 5 defenses in college football last year. Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, Penn State, in some order, with Michigan being the best. Okay, is this going to be a statistical top 5 defense in the country? I think they're going to be hard-pressed to achieve that. I see Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, USC on the schedule. I also see a trip to Seattle to take on Will Rogers, a very accomplished, very heady quarterback, not an ultra-talented player, but a really good passer. Jed Fish knows how to scheme an offense. So that's going to be a challenge in Seattle. So that's 5 of 12 games, and I don't think they faced that last season. But I do believe that this is going to be, in all practical terms, from the standpoint of evaluation of the play on the field, close to a top 5 defense in the country. I just don't know if they're going to achieve that statistically.
Well, I'm looking more specifically at efficiency that are opponent adjusted efficiency, advanced stats, metrics, not counting stats like total defense and scoring defense, where you can, Don Brown it, as we did for several years with him, where you can just blitz everybody every down and overwhelm teams that you are athletically better than, and then give up 35 points to Penn State on 6 plays. I mean, and then, Ryan Day's just, playing pitch and catch. I'm thinking more, advanced metrics in terms of efficiency. But when you look at this defense, I think I don't think Michigan's ever had a pair of defensive tackles like this. I mean, this is very similar to, a Glenn Davis era LSU. Frankly, we don't often see Big Ten teams, period, have tandems of defensive tackles like what Michigan's going to have with Mason Graham and with Kenneth Grant, and the ability to destabilize the line of scrimmage. We saw this at the end of last year. I mean, we saw holding Ohio State to 24 points, which that's holding a Ryan Day offense down. You saw what they did to Alabama, even in overtime. It held them to under 24 points. And then you saw what they did to a Washington team loaded with pros. They held them to 17 points. And the entire defensive front that stopped Alabama in overtime is all back this year. So they won't be 9 deep. I mean, they were even more than 9 deep last year. I mean, the depth this team had a year ago, the combination of development and COVID extra eligibility is just a really unique circumstance, all right? And so Mason Graham, like I saw one preseason magazine, didn't even have Kenneth Grant, a top 10 defensive tackle. That's insane to me. And that just tells you that they're just looking at stats And our guys didn't play a lot last year, Mark, because they got shuttled in and out so often. So these guys are going to put up some numbers now this year.
And that's why I say that these were four of the best defenses in the country. And at the end of the regular season, I didn't know who had the best defense. But Michigan, once they went to the playoffs and performed like that against that Alabama talent and against that Washington passing game, yes, clearly, I thought Penn State had the most athletic defense, Michigan the best. And I think we're mixing up LSU big men. You're going basketball, football on us.
Did I go Glenn Davis basketball?
David Davis, Glenn Dorsey.
The Glenn Dorsey, thank you. Yes, appreciate that. Thank you. Yep.
I thought your next point, Steve, was fascinating about Donovan Edwards in terms of his Big Ten status and Heisman race. So to look at his competition within the Big Ten, you get the two great running backs at Ohio State, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins.
Who will cancel each other out.
Cancel each other out.
Yeah.
That would be the...
Might be great for team success, but they will cancel each other out from a Heisman, unless one of them gets hurt. And I'm not going to forecast an injury, obviously. That's morbid. I'm not going to do that. But unless one of them gets hurt, they will cancel each other out from a Heisman perspective.
Yeah, so statistically, from the standpoint of just sharing duties, but also in terms of Ryan Day has been very upfront about saying, wink, wink, nod, nod, we're going to kill a bunch of teams. They're not going to play in the fourth quarter.
Right.
We're going to spare them, both of them, because we want to play 16 or 17 football games this year. This is going to get a chuckle out of your comment section. Drew Aller, I'm not going to be surprised if he has a bounce-back season and plays much better.
Neither will I. Big-time recruit, has a very good offensive coordinator coming in. You're missing an obvious guy. It's Dylan Gabriel.
Well, I'm not missing anyone,
Okay.
Steve. We're still going through the list here.
Okay.
Yes, Dylan Gabriel's the most obvious one because look at Bo Nix's numbers the last 2 years.
Agreed. Now, Dylan Gabriel is another guy that historically has a hard time staying healthy. But, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Dylan Gabriel is easily the first-team All-Big Ten quarterback. And a little tease from my upcoming college football preview I'm working on right now, I think Donovan Edwards and Dylan Gabriel will both be Heisman Trophy finalists at the end of the year.
And again, Bo Nix's numbers the last 2 years have been just otherworldly. And let's also not forget that Lincoln Riley produces Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks, and he's got a different one in terms of style of play than the other guys who could move around and dodge defenders in the backfield. Miller Moss is very much a drop, look, read, throw it, get the ball out of his hands. But still, Lincoln Riley's, despite many disclaimers we could put on his overall coaching performance from an offensive pass standpoint, Miller Moss is in good hands. And let's question Donovan Edwards to a certain extent. He's been Jekyll and Hyde all over the place. Yes, he's remarkable at times, but I also question just this stock market up and down fluctuation of his performances, but also that they've got Benjamin Hall, Khalil Mullings, they got the freshman coming in, Jordan Marshall, so his reps may be compromised as well.
To some degree, but I go back to 2 years ago. If Blake Corum doesn't hurt his knee and he's the one that making those runs against Ohio State at the end of the year, he runs away with the Heisman Trophy. He was probably leading the Heisman Trophy vote going into that Illinois game when he got hurt. So if that's Blake Corum closing the door on Ohio State in that game, he's winning the Heisman Trophy that year. And that's with Donovan Edwards rushing for, well, he ended up getting to about 1,000 yards because of Blake got hurt, but he would have rushed for 600-700 yards even if Blake had not gotten hurt that year. So that again goes to the style of our offense where it's just the antithesis of what you guys do. I mean, Marvin Harrison's going to have balls taken away from him by Emeka Egbuka. You know, Jackson Smith and Jigma is going to have balls taken away from him by Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison, and just the litany of guys you guys have. Marvin Harrison's also going to get his. And I think that from what I've seen and heard about him over the offseason, and he's going to captain the offense. He's the one true senior leader on the offense. He's gone through a lot the last couple of years with mental health and everything else. I know similar to Travion Henderson, who has a similar story with mental health and using his faith to kind of help get him centered in that arena. And that same thing's happened to Donovan Edwards. And I think the world of Travion Henderson. Frankly, Jim Harbaugh wanted Travion Henderson ahead of Donovan Edwards. It's just he committed to Ohio State instead. But in this case, I think that he's going to get the carries and he's going to get the catches. That's the other thing here, is that he doesn't require the 25, 28 carries a game that Blake Corum does to get the kinds of numbers that he's more of a big play guy, and he's going to be more of a player in the passing game. And you mentioned some of those names. You didn't even mention Khalil Mullings, so I think will be really good between the tackles and in the red zone. I think he'll take a lot of that physical punishment, and I think you're going to see. Donovan Edwards have a kind of a Jahmyr Gibbs season for Michigan this year, and on the big stage, playing in a lot of featured games.
And so then we go to Michigan defeats Ohio State, but loses the Big Ten championship game. So the numbers of scenarios that could play out with this 12-team playoff now is just exponentially higher than what it was with the 14 playoff. So there's all sorts of scenarios we could go through. So the first assumption I make with your prediction would be that Michigan is going to defeat Oregon.
Correct. I will tell you, Mark, you know how I do my preview every year is a projection of how I think the season will go. Okay. I had to do something this year I've never done before. I had to actually just manufacture an outcome. Okay, in several cases, because I don't know what the frickin' tiebreakers in all these leagues are going to be. They haven't announced them yet. All right, we have no divisions. We have one power conference that has told us their tiebreakers, the ACC. To determine who was going to be my two teams in the ACC championship game and my projections, I had to go to the fourth tiebreaker. Big 12 we don't know, the Big 10 we don't know, and the SEC we don't yet know what the tiebreakers are. And so I eventually just had to make a decision. I've got because in all these leagues I had 2 or 3 teams tying for a spot in the championship game. And so who gets in? I don't know. I don't know what the tiebreakers are going to be. Okay. I went and looked at the Big Ten, what I guessed it would be. I guessed it after head to head, of course. I guessed it would be record against common opponents. So I did that. Okay. When I had a tie between Michigan, Ohio State, or Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon, I did that. And they had all the exact same win percentage against the similar opponents. Okay, well, then I looked at overall Big Ten opponents. What do you think happened? Same exact thing happened. Okay, and so I don't know what these tiebreakers are going to be. So I just switched a result, played Homer, and I had Michigan beating Oregon so that I could actually come up with who the other team in the Big Ten was going to be. Had to do this in the Big 12. I have no idea what the tiebreaker scenario is going to be. I have a 3-team finish there between Oklahoma State, Iowa State, and Utah, and they all don't. Oklahoma State beats Utah in my scenario. Utah beats Iowa State. Iowa State doesn't play Oklahoma. I don't know what happens. So I just kind of played Homer and picked Iowa State. All right. I don't think people understand what the end of November is going to be like year in and year out with these leagues not having divisions and all these unbalanced schedules and what these tiebreakers are going to look like. You know what I mean? It really is a convoluted thing. And you'll notice, by the way, Athlon's preview does the same thing with their magazine every year. It's a projection of the end of the year. You'll notice this year there's something different that has not been the case the last few years. They don't tell you what the projected records of the teams are in Athlon's this year. They didn't do that. Every other year they've done that so that you could do the math to show how they ended up where they're at. I'll tell you why. I don't have to even ask Steve Lassen and Barrett, or it's not Barrett, Salee. I can't remember the other guy's name. I don't have to even ask them why they didn't do that, because who the hell knows what the tiebreakers are? So let's just eyeball it and pick the best teams, and that's what they did.
Hopefully the Big Ten has learned from a situation that was anticipated by both of us and others over the last couple of years, but never came to fruition. And that was the situation in the Big Ten Eastern Division when 3 teams are so much clearly better than not just everyone in the division, but everyone in the entire conference, that they're going to win against everybody else. And so all the tiebreakers, you just check them off,
yeah,
because they're all exactly the same. And you come down to some crazy like point differential or coin flip. So hopefully they are a little bit more, not that it's as likely as it would have been with those 3 playing in the same division, but there's still a possibility there with the 3 that we're talking about dominating everyone else in the conference.
I mean, I also think from a narrative standpoint, the other reason I picked Michigan to win that game is I do think we will start off slow. We did this and finished strongly. This happened the first year under Harbaugh. This happened the first year under Lloyd Carr. This happened the first year under Gary Moeller. Okay. And this happened in Bo Schembechler's first year. All those same scenarios. This happened the year after we won our last Natty in 97. We started 0-2 and then won 8 in a row, ended up sharing the Big Ten championship. So in my scenario, I have Michigan losing to Texas early in the year and then losing the first road game at Washington. All right. And starting off slow, losing those 2 games and then rebound. I would much rather play Oregon at home in November with a more experienced offense than, Texas in the heat in September. That's their native habitat. And it's 11 a.m., not at night. I think there's a lot of intangibles that favor Texas in the timing of that matchup.
So we could fall into another scenario here that we're going to run into more often than what we've seen in the past. And if your scenario plays out and Ohio State, let's say, beats Oregon and is undefeated, then Michigan needs to win that game against Ohio State. Ohio State does not need to win that game. As crazy as that sounds to us diehards thinking,
I know.
Well, Ohio State's just going to sleepwalk in this game because they've already got a spot in the Big Ten championship game.
I know. Again, these are things that I don't think a lot of fans have considered that probably won't take root right away, what you just said. But 20 years from now, coaches are going to think like that because that's how they think in college basketball, Because
in the NFL.
And the NFL. Yeah, because that's a postseason driven sport. And that's what college football now is. You bet.
For people that love the years and years and years of watching Major League Baseball as we did, where some of us wanted just the DH. I want to see the DH. I want to see capable hitters across the board. And others said, I want the purity of the pitcher. The pitcher is a baseball player. He should be able to hit. But some of us, like me, liked the diversity of, okay, I get to watch the DH, get to watch the aging sluggers, but I also get to watch the pitcher try to hit. And it's kind of fun and quirky. In this scenario, we get the NFL where we get to run into that final weekend. And I love this, Steve, when okay, San Francisco, they've got to win, but if they lose and then if they win, but how it's going to play out and you know what the tiebreakers are.
Yeah, because there are objective criteria to make the playoffs in those leagues.
Yeah,
now we actually have a playoff now. I would argue we've not had a playoff the last 10 years. We've had an invitational. Now There is a playoff. There is something you can do to automatically qualify, win your conference, okay, in a major league. If you're in a power conference, you win your conference, you're in, okay? But beyond that, it's still an invitational. Beyond that, with undefined metrics and very subjective analyses, okay? And so we're going to set a bunch of precedents in real time starting this year.
So the contrast I'm making, though, Steve, is that for some of us, much like the DH and the pitcher that want to see a little bit of both, on Sunday with the final weekend, you get the exact, if this happens, this happens, this happens, I know what's going to happen, and I can just pencil that in. It's just going to be fun watching it all play out, but I know what the decision is because it's right in the criteria versus the, okay, this is what could happen, but we don't know what they're going to decide based on if these things happen. We've got an idea, but it's still subjective in regards to the decisions made by the committee. So you get the best of both worlds, possibly, if you like a little flavor in both directions. And then finally, Steve, of course, your final point was that Michigan makes the playoff and then does not win a national championship. I think that Georgia's got the best roster. I looked at 8 different services that all say that Carson Beck is the best quarterback in college football, but I think it's a weak quarterback class. I don't think he's a dynamic, game-changing kind of guy, but he's a tremendous player. There's no question. But I think Ohio State is the best top-end talent, like the best 15 or 20 players. If we lined them all up among schools, I think Ohio State.
I actually agree with that analysis. I do. The problem I have with Ohio State against Georgia is I think Georgia has the better offensive line, the better coach, and the better quarterback.
Yes.
And
they do.
And I'm not so sure that I don't think Ohio State's better than them everywhere else, frankly. Okay, but you and I are roughly the same age, growing up in this part of the country. It's like sacrilegious to make it look like you can be worse than the other team at coach, quarterback, and offensive line, and beat them. It just it can happen. Sure, it's a one and done. It can occur. Okay, but if you're asking me to make a bet here in June, okay, I'm probably going to take the team I think has the better coach, quarterback, and offensive line. Okay, and but we're also not dealing with huge margins here either. I think that. Maybe the biggest margin is Carson Beck to Will Howard, but even that, I agree with you. I think Carson Beck is being considered a first-round draft pick right now because it is an anemic quarterback class. I think he clearly would have been the 6th quarterback picked in last year's class, for example.
Yeah, and under the evaluation you just made about coach, quarterback, and offensive line versus the superior team from a talent perspective, and then you are banking on a super hero type of effort from an edge rusher, a cornerback, somebody else that has to take their position, their role, and go get the football and take it out of somebody's hands to turn the game around, most likely.
Good stuff. All right. Anything else?
I think that should do it. Again, it was fascinating to go through these scenarios, Steve. You always look beyond what most people are capable of.
And either turn out to be really, really right or really, really wrong.
All right. The chance you take.
It is indeed. All right. That's why there's comment sections. All right. Thank you, Mark. Good to see you, brother.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Take care. All right. This week's Twitter poll results. We asked you, Michigan football's 2024 season win total is 9.5. Are you taking the over or the under? This is pretty split, and it should be because that number's like perfect. The over, 64% of you are taking the over. 36% of you are taking the under. I would be a pass because I think it's right. I think it's 50-50 that it's a 9 or 10 win year. I think Michigan's win total is one of the most perfect that the market has set, I think, this year, which is why I wouldn't play it. That brings us to our feedback of the week. Jason Campbell says, I do think it's fair given the uncertainty of quarterback, all the new coaches and the tough schedule, but I still think we win 9 to 10 games. I agree. I think it is very possible, as I've said all offseason, that Michigan has the first defensive tackle, the first linebacker, the first cornerback, the first tight end, and the first running back picked in next year's NFL draft. Wouldn't be nuts at all. So the question is there a quarterback on the roster that can convert 3rd and 6? That's the question. If there is, or eventually there becomes one, then I think Michigan is playing for a fourth straight Big Ten championship. If not, then I think Michigan ends up having to fight, scratch, and claw to be one of the last 1 or 2 at-large teams invited to the college football playoff. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. Please make sure to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, follow if you're listening on iTunes, like, rate, subscribe, comment if you're watching on YouTube. Please help us to find more Michigan fans just like you. And thanks to all of you that have done that for us already. We love the comments as well. Keep those coming too. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter in between episodes at Michigan Podcast, or X now. I keep forgetting that. At Michigan Podcast on X. And until the next time, we enjoy having you guys with us. The season approacheth. Stay tuned right here on Michigan Podcast. I'm Steve Deace. Go Blue.